What do Victoria Beckham, Idris Elba and Rachel Daly have in common? Well, they have all made career pivots of sorts. And this is one of the topics in today's conversation. We are meeting with Sorca, who is an outsourced client chief investment officer in the investment management industry in the UK. Sorca shares with us all about her area of expertise, her career journey, and she has some great advice for us too. We also talk about aligning purpose and environment in your work, embracing change for professional growth, the power of curiosity and inquiry, cultivating mentor relationships for success, overcoming self-doubt and building confidence, and of course, recognizing the right time to pivot, like Victoria, Idris and Rachel did. So if that sounds good to you, fantastic. Sorca and I will see you in the show. Enjoy. Hello, Sorca. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, Jo. Thanks so much for having me.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and how long you've been doing it for?
Sure. So I'm Sorca Kelly-Skolta, and I'm an outsourced client chief investment officer for pension funds. What that means, I work in the pensions industry and we help pension funds figure out how they should invest their money, and then we make that happen for them. So if you think of us like as an architect and contractor kind of thing, we're a one-stop shop. And my job is to lead that effort and work with our clients to find out what's the right thing for them and make sure that it happens on their behalf. So I've been doing that in one way or another, in this sort of general area for about 28 years, a long time now. But I've seen a lot of change in the industry. What I do today probably didn't exactly exist when I entered the industry, but I've been doing things that have sort of led me on a logical path towards the role that I'm in today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, Sorca, this is a podcast, so I'm wondering if you could tell us what you're listening to right now and share any recommendations.
Oh, well, I'm a bit of a geek, I suppose. A podcast I love to listen to is Classical Fix. It's from Radio 3, BBC Radio 3. And it's the presenter chooses 6 classical tracks that they think somebody might like, and then they speak to that, give that listening list to the person they're thinking of, and then they ask them to come back in and tell them how they found it, what they thought of it. And it's just really nice because it's interesting to hear people's reactions to the music, but it's also a great way to get to new music. It's sort of a reverse Desert Island Discs, if you like.
That sounds really cool. And is it people that we would know, or just regular people like you and me?
No, people who are sort of in the public eye. Yeah, they're reasonably well-known people in the UK here. So it's not like the President of the United States, but it's definitely people who we would know of. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds great. Yeah, and just thinking about Desert Island Discs, I love the music, but actually often it's more the stories that I think I personally and people enjoy too, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's always really interesting. The way if you go to a book club or if somebody reads a book, people react to it in such a different way. And it's just nice to hear how people sort of react to a piece of music. And as well as that, I think the person who presents it, their knowledge of classical music is extraordinary. So it just leads you to things that you would never have found by yourself.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing. Okay. So, Client Chief Investment Officer. There are so many misconceptions about what we do. So I'd love to know some of the misconceptions of your role.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I was asking my husband last night, what do you think I do all day? And he said, you just talk to people all day, Sorca. That's what you do. And I asked a friend the same question. She said, I think you probably just sit in front of a computer all day doing something. I think kind of both things are true, actually, because I sit in front of a computer talking to people a lot of the time now. But it's pensions, so it's about pension funds, and it's investments, so it's about what's happening in markets and in our economy. I think the misconceptions are sometimes people think that I'm going to be able to give them personal financial advice. They'll say, how should I save my money? Or that I'm going to give them sort of, a hot investment tip about, which stock they should be buying now, what's selling, what's hot. It's neither of those things. Really, I'm working with most often corporate pension funds. So there's the clubbed together savings of lots of employees of that corporate. So you're really thinking about how do you invest this whole big pool of money, and you're not thinking in this job so much about what's happening day to day. You're more thinking about how can I sort of manage this with a view to the next 5, 10, even 20 years, because it's really a very long-term savings effort. You're looking after the retirement savings of people who are, working today still, like you and I, and have many years to go before they're even thinking of retiring. You need to make sure the money makes it safely to that point in time. So I think those are the misconceptions. It's not sort of personal finance, day-to-day investing. It's much more business to business, long-term.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. And if you had to sum up the purpose of your role in, I don't know, a sentence or two, how would you describe it?
Well, at heart, I like to think we're looking after the savings of like many, many people and helping to make sure that they are able to secure their income for when they retire and hopefully have sort of that nice, comfortable retirement after years of being a wage slave, as many of us are. And so I think that's the real purpose behind it. That's what sort of makes me feel that I'm doing something worth doing every day. In a sort of grand scheme of things. If I think then about sort of what my actual role is and, day to day in my job, I guess there are two main parts of that. The first is really building those investment portfolios, sort of figuring out what it is that's important to a client, what they need to achieve, how much risk they're going to be able to take, how much time they're going to be able to spend engaging with you on it, and then just really building the right portfolio for them. So there's a lot about sort of understanding the markets, understanding the various risks and how we can trade those off. So we build those portfolios, and then of course we have to run them. We have to always make sure that they're staying appropriate, that we're evolving them, that we're always bringing our best ideas into them. So that's a big part of my role, is that core investment sort of content. But then the other big part of it is marketing that and selling it to sort of new potential clients. We are a business and we earn money by selling those services to our client base. And a big part of my job is also marketing, talking about our capabilities, being able to describe what it is we do. And then also the actual sort of cut and thrust of a new business opportunity when you're writing the request for proposal, when you're actually putting together a set of ideas for a specific opportunity and taking that through to pitch. So probably it's about half and half of my time split across those two key dimensions.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. And just, I guess, to bring it to life for the audience who might not be so familiar, let's say, for example, I work for M&S and M&S have outsourced their pension to be run by you and your firm. I'm almost the benefactor at the end of the day. Is that the best way to think about it?
Well, in concrete terms, typically M&S or any other sort of corporate may have set up one of these pension funds, and they're required to do that under a trust historically. So there's a trust that's set up. It's a separate legal entity from the company, but they have a duty to support it. And so that means they have to organise for individuals' contributions to be paid into that. There have to be a set of trustees who are appointed from the company and also from the membership to look after that and make sure that the money is being invested appropriately and that it's all looking after the best interests of ultimately the employees whose savings are in that fund and who will rely on that fund for some portion of their income and retirement. So typically our clients that we're talking to on a day-to-day are usually the trustees, because they're the ones who own the investment of that, if you like. But quite often we're also talking to the corporate, because clearly they're a key stakeholder.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you very much. And again, I guess for someone who's maybe not so familiar with the pension landscape, can you kind of give us an overview of what that might look like?
Yeah, well, so if here in the UK, so there are, I think today, about 5,500 what we call defined benefit corporate pension funds. So these are the kind of pension where the company says, for every year that you work for us, we're going to give you, this amount of income in retirement. And so they've just told you how much income they're going to give you, and then they say, well, we'll figure out how much money needs to be put aside to make sure that we can do that. We'll put that in trust, but our obligation to you is to give you this income. So it's about 5,500 of those. There are some very big ones, tens of billions of pounds. And then there's lots of much, much smaller ones, which are just a few £1,000,000 in size. And also it's gotten very mature. So these were all set up probably just after the Second World War. So to begin with, they're mostly for people who are still quite early in their careers. When they started out, it was for a young population, still many years away from retirement. But now here we are in 2023, and obviously there are lots of people who've retired from these funds, so they're taking their pension. So these funds are now having to pay out a lot of money. They're also sort of keeping it topped up for younger people who are still in there. So it's a very changed sort of picture in terms of how big it is, whether it's paying out money or sort of still a lot of younger members in. For the most part, UK pension funds are now quite mature and getting more and more mature, and probably will run off over the next couple of decades because they're not really taking new members in. So that's the main landscape. And we talk to schemes of all sizes in all sort of sectors, from retail, like your M&S example, through to construction and other financial companies. That's one of the great sort of joys of the job, is that you're touching so many different types of companies and parts of the world, I suppose. So yes, that's does that answer the question sufficiently?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you. Some people might have heard in the news when, I don't know, there's strikes at the BBC, for example, about their pension. Can you give a sense of what they're upset about?
Yeah, well, they can be upset about a few things. They can be upset that maybe they were promised a certain level of income in retirement, but that doesn't. The corporates decided they can't afford to promise that anymore, so they're reduced the level of the promise. So people get upset about that, understandably. Or the other side is that sometimes they said, well, we're still going to give you that level of income, but you probably need to contribute more to it yourself than you have been doing. So people feel unhappy about that as well. And that can be particularly tricky if it comes at a time, for example, at the moment when you've got a cost of living crisis and people can ill afford those kinds of changes in their finances. So those tend to be two of the big ones. The other is that if, as I mentioned, some funds, or many funds now actually, have closed to new membership. So if I joined, or you joined one of these corporates now, we probably wouldn't get one of these defined pension funds. We get a different type of pension funds, and people sort of feel that they may be losing out when that happens as well. There are pros and cons of both approaches, but it has tended to be seen as the gold standard to have defined benefit.
Yeah, thank you. So helpful. And the only other thing that I wanted to ask you about is some I guess, employees or contractors who don't have a company pension, there's something called auto enrollment. Where does their pension get enrolled, and who looks after that?
Yeah, so that's that was a big piece of legislation, went through about, must be 15 years ago, but auto enrollment probably started about 10 years ago now. And basically it says that all employers down to a certain size need to arrange for pensions for their employees. And this is even employers with one or two employees. I'm very privileged to have had a nanny for the last number of years. I auto-enroll her into a pension fund. So it really is an obligation, because it was felt really important that people needed to have access to these kinds of savings opportunities. And there is a default vehicle. So a lot of those, if somebody doesn't want to have to go and choose a pension vehicle as the employer, there's a vehicle called NEST. So that's the National Employee Savings Trust. And that just takes everybody's savings, and it's built up a really impressive sort of infrastructure to do that. And but there are also other sort of what we call master trusts that you could choose, or your employer could choose on your behalf. And sometimes they might choose them because they like the style of their communication or how they go about investing the monies. So yes, everybody, most of the nation, above the age of 22, I believe it is, and in a certain level of employment, a certain number of hours per week, should be enrolled in one of these master trusts or in Nest.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I was listening to a recent money clinic, FT Money Clinic podcast with, I think her name is Claire Barrett, and she's had a book come out recently, and a big message in that book is don't put off enrolling or don't put off paying into your pension, because it's really one of the best savings vehicles out there. So, yeah, thank you.
Tax efficient. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Sorca, so if we zoom in to an average day a week, and, apart from being on the phone and looking at your computer all day, what are we going to find you doing in an average week?
Yeah, so lots of things. I suppose, first of all, as I said, one of the key responsibilities is making sure that the money is run effectively, that we're investing it appropriately. So there'll be a regular cadence of meetings to review how's it performing, how our portfolio is performing, are there things that we need to change, do we want to adjust in any way, are there new ideas that we want to bring into the portfolios, have our clients' circumstances changed so we need to make an adjustment. So we're always reviewing the appropriateness of the portfolios, making sure the performance is coming through the way we would hope it would, and that we're monitoring the risks as well and making sure that they remain prudent. So there'll be a regular cadence of meetings around that sort of for various client portfolios. Then we may be doing some research at any given point in time, sort of thinking, well, we had an interesting idea, but does it really work? So you need to sort of go and really test that and do some research around it. You might be building some new ways of analysing things, some new tools to help help you in that role of managing the money and being the architect of those portfolios. Yeah. So I could be reviewing pieces of research or trying to create them or contribute to them or having discussions around some of these ideas. And then the other is new business. I could be speaking at events. I could be writing an RFP. I could be preparing to do a presentation to a prospective client. So those are the three main areas of activity. And over any given week, you're probably spending more in one rather than the other two. So it's not the same every week. It does tend to vary, but I think across a year, you're probably spending about, roughly equal times across those. And then there are also those moments and times when, you're doing that continuously, but you need to step back every once in a while, sort of try and take in the big picture, because, when you're sort of doing that regular cadence, stuff could be flying overhead that you'd miss completely. So we do sort of have these sort of regular, 2-3 times a year. So let's step back, take a moment out and think, are we going about this the right way? And a more comprehensive sort of review and brainstorming as well, which I always look forward to because they're so much fun.
Yeah, thank you. And you mentioned tools. What kind of tools would you be using?
Well, a lot of what we're doing can get quite technical. But we're building models, and we're building mathematical models of the of our clients' liabilities, what they've promised to members. We're building mathematical models of the markets and how they might behave over, the next 3, 5, 10 years. And then we're bringing those together into something that really looks at what the potential sort of outcomes for a particular client might be and how you might change that sort of portfolio of investments to better meet their specific needs or be more aligned to their particular sort of liabilities or promises to members. And so that can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. So we're looking at different ways of representing what's happening in the markets. We're looking at what's happening in the markets. There's some sort of structural shift that means we need to think about how we put that model together a little bit differently. So, for example, for the last 10, 15 years since the financial crisis, we've had really, really low interest rates. We've had almost no inflation. Markets haven't been terribly volatile. They've really just been going upwards. A few little squalls along the way, but mostly it's been a nice upward sort of movement in the charts. But that's really changed in the last number of years. Obviously, we had COVID, which was an enormous big sort of hole punch, if you like. And then things continued for a while, but just over the last year now, we've had inflation taking off. We've had interest rates rising. We've had a huge amount of volatility. And we think that's a structural shift. We think that's here to stay. And we need to think about how we reflect that. What changes does that make to how we model, how we think about the markets, and ultimately how we invest money for our clients. And so that tends to be a very mathematical exercise, but there's a lot of economic expertise that needs to come into that. My background and training is quite mathematical and actuarial, but you really need someone who understands how central banks works and all that economics as well, and they need to be part of it. And then the actuarial part is the sort of the liability sides and, understanding those benefits that are being promised to members. So all of that needs to come together. And we're talking about how to build those models, how to run optimizations, how to interpret the results, whether they actually make sense. Models are great, but you usually have to apply quite a lot of judgment and interpretation to what comes out. And then ultimately figuring out, how do I make this easy to use going forward? So you can do lots of heavy lifting and number crunching, but ultimately we want to turn that into a tool, to come back to the word that you picked up on, that everyone on the team can use and generate pretty consistent results and use day to day in how they're thinking about and measuring their portfolios.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I'm wondering if you might be able to share the typical structure of a team like yours. So what kind of roles sit in your team that the audience might like to be aware of?
Yeah, so the CI, different organizations will structure these things differently. But where I am, we're part of the investment desk, if you like. So we're definitely seen as investors. Our particular team, there'll be a lot of mathematical capability on that team because, as I mentioned, we're doing a lot of modeling. But the other key skill set that we have, because we are client CIOs, we have to be able to talk to our clients. So we need to have that strong mathematical muscle, but be able to then translate some of those potentially quite complex ideas to our clients, who are trustees, and they're not anywhere. This is not their day-to-day job. They're not in the markets every day. They could be working for Marks and Spencer's, as you come back to the name you picked out of the hat earlier on, or they could be making cars for a living or something. And you really need to be able to, translate, saying that here's what I understand of your situation, and given that, I've done some modelling, and this is what it comes up with, and you need to be able to describe that in something that, in a way that they can get comfortable with, right? And so you need to have those communication skills and be able to build that trust and rapport with your clients. So most of the people who come into the team have probably got a fairly numerous background, but also early on just need to be starting to get in front of clients and develop those communication skills. The other part of it is that, I said we're like the architects, and then we have to sort of bring the portfolio together, and that means engaging with lots of other teams from around the organisation who have particular specialisms that you need to use to sort of bring everything together, and so that ability to collaborate and sort of try and capture and keep everybody sort of on board and gently keep the whole thing moving forward. That's really important as well. So there's a combination of soft and hard skills. It's definitely, you need both in this job.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. And which teams in the organisations are the main teams that you would collaborate with?
So we have teams that, if I start sort of from the top down, we've got teams who specialise in building these models of the markets. So they will probably tend to be a little bit more at desk, building the models, and we need to engage them and tell them this is what we need. This is, I'm not understanding the outcomes or what's coming out of that model at the moment. Let's talk a little bit about why that is and how we might adjust to make it something that's a bit more understandable, or what's the word I'm thinking, that we can interpret better, that feels like it's the right result. So those are the sort of research teams, and they're really sort of building those detailed models and testing them and working with us to make sure that they are making sense. And then when we think about, once we've used the tools to figure out what shape of portfolio we want, then we need to go and talk to the teams that actually are specialists in managing particular asset classes. So we'll talk about, if we look at equities, the equity markets, we'll have teams who just run equities, and there'll be teams that just runs US equities, and there'll be a team that just runs European equities. So we'll need to talk to them about how we're, running that part of the portfolio. And then there are other asset classes. There's fixed income, there's alternatives. So all of that needs to come in together. And then there probably needs to be someone who rebalances and trades. Then there's going to be a performance reporting team who's sort of keeping track of what the performance is of that. Then there's going to be a client service and a sales team. So you can see how it's, we're talking to a lot of people to keep this all going. We're conducting the orchestra.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. So zooming out a little bit, you've told us about those brainstorming sessions and when you take a step back and, see what's happening. Are there any other things that happen, perhaps less frequently throughout the year that might be worth mentioning?
Well, I suppose, I mentioned new business being sort of a big part of what we do. And there's always some activity going on. You're always having to try and sort of make sure that you're talking to people, staying out there, hopefully generating opportunities. But if you think about it in stages, you'd have what we'd call sort of marketing or pre-pipeline activity. So this is when you're really just chatting to people and they're not particularly thinking about OCIO or changing anything, but you just want to make sure that if they do, they know that you're there. And so you do that marketing and sort of demonstrate to people, this is how we think about it. And, we think we've got a strong capability. And then you'll have the opportunities where the RFPs come in. And there's always going to be fewer of those. So, you're talking to lots of pre-pipeline stuff and then fewer actually turn into opportunities. And then you get sort of the really big pitches, which can be very big and very complex. And if you've got more than 2 of those a year, I don't know how you'd manage, because they tend to become quite all-consuming for a short period of time. But they're a lot of fun, right? You can sort of thrive on those kinds of sort of exciting sort of opportunities and giving everything you've got to it to make it happen. So those are the other things that come along every once in a while. They need to be there, right? Because they're a sign that your business is growing and moving forward, that you're getting those opportunities.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Sorca, tell us what you love most about your role.
It's the variety, I think. Hopefully what you've heard from me is that I'm touching so many different parts of our business. You're touching so many different types of other businesses and people, and the trustees and the clients you work with, as well as your colleagues within the business. And over time, of course, you begin to talk to more and more to colleagues, like just all around the industry. You build that network over time. And I think the variety that comes with that is just, it's a lot of fun. And it keeps me sort of interested and engaged and curious and sort of finding out new stuff all the time. And I love that sense that I'm always learning stuff and there's always something new happening. And so that I enjoy greatly. I do enjoy the technical challenge and the creative opportunities around that. If you get somebody comes in and they said, we've got this thorny issue, we've got these difficult circumstances, how can you help us? And it's like, oh gosh, where do I start? But you do, right? And you break it down and you figure it out and you start putting it together. And that's very rewarding when you sort of feel like I've done something, put it together from something that felt daunting at the outset. And then I think ultimately, when you feel that you really have helped your clients, that's the real reward, isn't it? Is that ultimately when your client said, this is great, I feel confident, I feel more secure, I feel more likely to be able to deliver for the members of this pension fund. That's the gold standard, right? That's what you really want to get to.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. What's the most challenging part of the work?
Yeah, well, it's probably all the same things, to be honest, Joe. It's probably the fact that it is so varied. It means that you're trying to stay on top of a bunch of stuff all the time. And, sometimes I feel you're just skimming across the top of a whole bunch of stuff. And there are other roles where people perhaps have a narrower set of things to do, but they can get really deep in and become really deeply expert on something. Yeah. But sometimes, you just can't, you have to trust your colleagues who are the experts in something. Know enough to be able to say this is the right thing to bring into this portfolio and be able to represent that to clients or to others, and then sort of if they need to get deeper, bring in the deep expertise. But sort of just juggling all of that and knowing the right point at which to say this is a time when you actually need to talk to this person who really knows the detail on this. So juggling, staying on top of that, and sort of getting that balance between not trying to be expert, but having enough knowledge to be credible and compelling to your clients ultimately, and actually to get it right. You can't. It's not all dim. So that's challenging, and then sometimes tasks can just seem impossibly complex, and you're just scrambling around and trying to figure out how on earth am I going to start this, and you just have to sort of knuckle down, break it down. As my mum used to always say to me, so how do you eat an elephant? Which is one bite at a time. Right. I think that actually came from Desmond Tutu to begin with. So that it can be daunting sometimes.
Yeah.
But if you're working in the kind of collaborative environment that I hope many people will be in the future, because I think collaboration is the way forward for all of us, because the problems we're dealing with now are so more complex. It's not something any one person can deal with. We all have to collaborate. And if you've got a good collaborative culture, then your colleagues will support you and you'll all figure out together a way of taking it forward. But it's hard. Yeah, it can be hard. And the technical stuff can be hard.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. When you look back over your career so far, what's been, what's the thing you're most proud of?
What's the thing I'm most proud of? I had one client that I started looking after I remember exactly when it was. It was 2008, because I remember the first meeting with them, we were getting the news of, I think it was one of the banks collapsing. I remember which one. So it was very much in the teeth of the financial crisis. And then I worked with them in an advisory capacity for about 6-7 years, and sort of set them on a particular path or way forward or whatever. But then I changed roles, so they were no longer my client. And a few years later, the chair called me up and he said, Sorca, today we just completed, securing all of the members' benefits. There was enough money in the pot. We were able to secure it and lock it all down, and it's all guaranteed. And he said, I credit you with a lot of that. And I thought, oh my goodness. First of all, to sort of feel that I had any hand in that at all, and for him to take the time to call me up and say that to me, that was awesome.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. Sorca, I'd love to go back to the beginning and hear where it all started. So when you were a kid, when you were at school, what were you thinking you might like to be when you grew up?
Gosh, anything and everything. I never had a firm plan. I'm pretty sure at one point I wanted to be a nun. And I think at another point I wanted to be a scientific journalist. I think that was because I liked Tomorrow's World. I don't know if you remember Tomorrow's World. Yeah. So I was a big fan of that programme. I wanted to be a presenter on that. Probably wanted to be a doctor at some point, because, that was just one of the things you were supposed to want to be, I think, at that time. So there wasn't ever any one thing that I fixated on like permanently, but I did probably fairly early on settle on maths as being the thing that I enjoyed and wanted to study. Yeah. I had a great teacher who probably set me on that path, Sister Marie. And she, I think she just at one point very quietly said to me, you're good at maths, Sorca. You should think about studying maths. Yeah. And she put that thought in my head, and I think probably set me on that path. Yeah.
So is that what you went on to study at uni?
Yes, it is. I studied maths in Dublin, did a maths degree, and I loved every minute of it. I just really enjoyed the subject, and I don't think I was thinking in particular, what that was going to qualify me to do. I was just doing the thing that I enjoyed doing. I knew there'd be jobs out of it, an array of jobs. I hadn't any firm idea of what exactly I wanted to do from that. And indeed, my class have all gone on to various different things. I've got one of my friends works. She's a nuclear. She's not a weapons inspector. We joke that she's a weapons inspector for the UN, but she actually looks after she did physics more than maths, and so she's looking at sort of nuclear reactors and monitoring safety standards. And I've got other people who sort of work in various forms of computing or physics, mathsy end of physics type science, and then lots of people who went into finance as well, as that was the gravy train, I suppose, at the time that I was coming out of university in the mid-90s. But I hadn't any clear preconceptions about what I wanted to do. Just enjoyed maths and seemed like a pretty decent thing to choose at college.
Yeah. And so when you were coming towards the end of uni studying maths, what were you thinking about, and how did you take those steps into the working world?
So I probably did think finance at that point. I think it was just quite a common choice for people who are in numerate degrees, and certainly all of the big banks from London would come over to Dublin and recruit from universities, as they do all around the UK. But all the big banks were sort of there on recruitment fairs, and I guess some of the insurance companies probably came as well. I was aware of the actuarial qualification. I did have an uncle who had done it. He lived in the States, but I knew he'd been an actuary. So that was on my sort of radar, and I kind of thought it would be nice to have a professional qualification. The idea of having that sort of certification appealed to me. It just felt like it was going to offer some level of security or something. So I decided that's what I'd go for. I'd go and train as an actuary. And at that time, then, there were a couple of choices you needed to make within that. You could either go and work for an insurance company. They employ actuaries. They need actuaries to help them set premiums or figure out, how much money to set aside against certain insurance obligations. So you could go and work in-house. Or you could work for a consulting firm, a firm that sort of offered advice to insurers or to pension funds. And at the time, it wasn't a very sophisticated decision. Consulting firms paid just a notch more. So that's where I headed for.
Sensible.
And then once you made... Yeah, it's hard to say no, right? And then once you get there, you've got another sort of choice, which is which area do you want to work in? Do you want to work in insurance, either life insurance or general insurance, or do you want to work in pension? And you just have an opportunity to go meet various people from the teams and chat to them about what they do. And I didn't really know the difference, but the guys in pensions seemed to talk about that they had worked with companies from right across all different sectors of business, and they were talking to different groups of trustees. And I thought, that sounds kind of interesting. So that's where I landed, into a pensions consulting practice.
Yeah. Wow. And how long does it take to train to be an actuary?
It took me 4 years. Some people do it in 3. Some people take it a lot longer. But I think 4 to 5 is pretty typical. Yeah. Okay, so you're working and studying at the same time. Usually the actuarial employers give you a period of study leave, and they support you by paying for your tuition materials. And so if you're working for a company that typically employs actuary, that is well set up, that process of supporting you through your studies.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. So you stay at the consulting firm and you complete your actuarial studies, and then what happens next?
Not quite. So I didn't actually finish my actuarial studies there. I think when I got there, I was there for about 2 years.
Yeah.
And when I arrived and started doing the actual work, I think a lot of people have said the actuarial profession is an opportunity to use your mathematical skills creatively. But I think I found at that time, and it's different now, these things evolve, but it felt like a lot of the creative stuff had already been done. And by the time I got involved in it, there was really more pro forma calculations. So you were just sort of crunching out, fairly, standard sums that somebody else had designed earlier on, and that didn't feel very creative. Yeah. And then, but at the same time, I was lucky because there were a couple of people on the team who were beginning to start into this track of building financial models of the markets and starting to think about how can we advise our clients on investment strategy and build models to support that advice. And I got involved in that. And I just thought, actually, this is interesting. This is where sort of the new and creative stuff is. I'd like to do a little bit more of that. So one of those individuals then moved to another firm, and they recruited me across to my next role, which is where I completed my actuarial studies.
Yeah.
It's another big actuarial firm, but they had a bigger specialist team that was looking at these kinds of questions. And I'd say that's where I kind of learnt my craft, if I can put it like that, how to be an architect, coming back to my sort of earlier analogy. And that firm, it was an American firm. They're a very big American firm, headquartered there, but they obviously also had quite a large presence here in Europe. But a lot of our clients were American headquartered multinational firms who had pension funds in lots of different countries around Europe, and they wanted to understand what are the sort of investment risks that we're running with these various plans. Can we do it a bit more efficiently? So that's what we used to do out of the London office, is run sort of studies of all of these European pension plans. And yeah, it was varied and interesting, and you were always learning, and it was quite a new field at the time. So that's where I really learned the core of my expertise.
Yeah, and I think really great that
next, aren't you?
I am, but I also was just wanted to kind of highlight how good it was that you listened to how you were feeling, because you'd realised that perhaps one part of it was maybe not as interested and as exciting as it could have been, and so you pivoted slightly. And it sounds as though you really, you found that there. And I guess, how did you know when you'd got it right?
You're having fun, you're enjoying it, you know, sort of you're happy to go into work every day, you're curious, you're sort of, you want to ask the next question and do the next thing. That's how you know it's right. If you're getting up and going, oh God, I have to do another transfer value calculation, that's kind of not where you need to be. And particularly, people say life is short, but I also say life is long, right? So, you want to spend the time doing stuff that you're getting some reward from. And if you're not getting that, what I do believe is important to be a sticker, right? Because every job has some element of drudgery to it. Like, don't get me wrong, the days when you're doing really hard drudgery sort of stuff in modelling, but on balance, you feel like you're doing more fun, and sort of you're having to deal with some of that treacle we all do. So it's important to stick at things, but the balance has to be right, and ultimately you have to feel that you're moving forward, learning, enjoying, kind of thing. And sometimes that stops because the content of what you're doing is not quite right, which was the case in my first job, I suppose. And sometimes it's because the environment's not quite right. Maybe you're doing the right thing, but it's not the best place to be doing it. And so that at times has led to me moving on as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I think really good for highlighting that distinction. Thank you. Okay, so what did happen next?
What did happen next, I guess, was the latter, which is that was great for a number of years, but then I think just things happened in the business, and some people moved on, that it didn't feel it was going to be the right place for longer. That just happens in businesses sometimes. I think that particular one, the investment consulting was no longer strategic for them. They were really focusing more on some of the core actuarial stuff. And I suppose for the people who were senior in the team at that time, that meant they felt, well, I'm not sure that my promotion opportunities are going to be what they need to be if I'd stay here. So they moved on, and then if you don't have that layer above you early in your career, it's difficult to learn or sort of get the right opportunities. So I moved on, and then I moved on to a specialist investment consulting firm at the time, one that you know well, Joe. So I was there for a very long time. So it was a specialist investment consulting firm, so working on giving this kind of advice to clients about how do you put together the right portfolio. And at that time, they were beginning to also implement that advice. So for many years, they've been leading and giving the advice, but they were just beginning to say, we can also do it for you if you would like us to do that. We can be both your architect and chief contractor. And so at the time that I joined, it was still mostly advisory with a bit of implementation. But by the time I left, which was 14 years later, that was sort of the single longest stint of my career. It was really a fully outsourced business, and what we would now call OCIO, what I do today. That was a term that didn't exist when I joined that business, and it did by the time I left. And I think in working for that business through that period, I lived that evolution.
Yeah.
So again, it was a great place to be. It had a lovely culture. It was doing new and interesting things. It was probably, leading the charge on that sort of particular change from pure advisory to fully outsourced. And it was a great place to work for many years. Yeah.
Yeah, and perhaps kind of call out the highs in that journey through that organisation, and maybe you could touch on I don't know if it was in this organisation or previous, but your first foray into leadership and how that was for you.
Yeah, no, it was probably in this organisation, because I think by the time I joined it, I was about 6 years into my career. So just, getting the really sort of junior sort of stage of my career behind and beginning to acquire more responsibility and being asked to sort of own larger parts of the relationship with clients, or the content that we were delivering to clients. And so when I joined the consulting team, and I led the what we call ALM, sort of that task of doing the modelling, asset liability modelling is ALM. And so I was tasked with making sure that we were, taking that forward and on point with that. And then I also had a small book of clients that I needed to deliver that to, and I was responsible for. And then just for the first several years while I was there, just that role grew because the book of clients that I was looking after grew. We needed ALM services for a broader set of needs than we had previously. So it used to be just for a small number of clients. But as we were moving towards something which was more outsourcing, then there was a greater demand for those services across the business. So naturally, the scope of your role was just increasing as the business was growing. But then what began to happen is that, well, now we're moving towards really being a more fully outsourced business, and we need to change the way we put together advice and implementation. And that means it's going to change people's roles, and we need to reshape the organization and how we think about how we sort of deliver this stuff for our clients. And that's where you start getting the leadership, because obviously as someone who sort of had my arms around how we provide, how we shape that service, a big part of my role was then figuring out how do we actually change it and sort of move teams around and reposition ourselves a little bit. So yeah, and then you suddenly find one day that you've become kind of the senior person. It almost happens by accident. So you sort of sit up one day and go, how did that happen? I used to be one of the naughty kids down the back, but now suddenly sort of people are looking up to me, and gosh. And you feel a huge amount of responsibility to that. But also you need a lot of guidance when you start stepping into those roles.
Yeah.
And it's hard. When you first start trying to delegating is hard, because people do things in a different way than how you would have done it yourself, and you can't control it, nor should you, and you have to let people get on with it. And so that's one sort of piece of learning that you have to just roll with. And you have to learn a different set of skills in how to influence people, and how to persuade people, and how to get along with people as well. So, there was no particular point in time at which you become a leader, but you have to grow into it, I suppose, and make mistakes. You do make mistakes.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. And I think just on that influence and persuasion point, in a role like yours, where you're collaborating with other senior members of other teams, that comes into play there as well, doesn't it? So it's a really important skill for a leader and a non-leader, that influence and persuasion piece.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so, you can't just sort of say, I need this task completed, please. You have to be able to say, I've got this opportunity, it's really exciting, I'd love for you to be a part of, and to sort of persuade people that it's something they want to be a part of. And then you need to get your ideas across as how you think it might go, but leave plenty of space for those people to sort of see a vision of how they want to go. And that's in both of your interests, because you want to sort of convey how what direction you want this whole thing to travel in, but you also want to hear people's ideas, right? And so you want to be able to give the space for those ideas to come out, and then you need to empower people to act on them and sort of make them happen. So all of that is it's very different to when you're in the early stage of your career, when you just have to get stuff done.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. Thank
Yeah.
you. So what happens next?
Okay, so they're 14 years. And then I think that particular organisation, again, it was going through some big changes, changes in ownership and changes in business strategy associated with that. And that just is a natural fork in the road, right? You sort of say, either I'm going to stay and sort of climb on in the next chapter of this organisation's journey, or I should take a look around and sort of see what else is out there. So you naturally do that. You'd be unwise not to take that opportunity to just see what else is going on. So I made the decision to join an asset management firm, big one. And it was one where, I'll come back. I've been using this analogy of the architect and, the lead contractors around. So this was an organisation that maybe had been the contractor, sort of does all of the asset management, but it didn't have any architects on its payroll. It was one would wait for an advisory firm, would work with advisory firms who would advise clients, what portfolio to put together, and then introduce clients to asset managers who would actually sort of do the implementation. And there would usually be an array of them. And I think because of that change that I've been describing about how more and more this was coming together and outsourcing was a theme.
Yeah.
This firm felt they needed to have some architects to help them sort of engage with their clients around how to build some of these portfolios and help them sort of figure out how best to position some of their capabilities and products to clients. So it was quite a sales enablement role. Yeah. So I made the decision to join that firm in that role. And I was there for about 6 years. Mm-hmm. And again, just absolutely on a learning roller coaster all over again, because although we're sort of in the same industry, they were coming at it from a very different background and history and with a different set of expertise. Yeah. And so, you're just learning a whole bunch of stuff all over again. So instantly enjoyed that. And it was great to be able to sort of use all of the sort of expertise that I'd built up and my knowledge of the pension fund side and the architect side, and use that in an environment where some of those skills were a bit lacking in that organisation, frankly, which is why they hired me. That was great for a time. Ultimately, I think this is another example where I felt that it wasn't the right place to continue on long term, because if you're not actually, it sort of felt like I had a bit of a half-life. The expertise that I'd gathered while I was at my former job, you rely on that for a time, but if you're not continuously refreshing it, which you're not because it wasn't the core business of this firm, then it begins to go a bit stale, and you sort of begin to feel that you're not keeping up somehow, and clients will begin to see that as well. So your value to the organisation begins to diminish. And unless the organisation is going to invest and sort of build that particular sort of service to clients, then it's not going to be the right place to continue and sort of build your own sort of expertise. So that's why I began to look around again for another opportunity. And then my current role became available. The stars aligned, and I find myself back working for an asset management firm, but one that has strategically got an OCIO desk. So in many ways, that's brought together all of the things that I've done, because I'm doing that sort of advisory work, but at an asset manager who actually makes it a core business to make the portfolios work and happen in practice. I feel like I've landed on my feet. I'm in a happy spot, a purple patch at the moment. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I think it's really interesting because so much of what you described about your role is technical, and yet those client and sales enablement pieces are so important. And it just makes me think how sometimes sales is seen as a bit of a dirty word, isn't it? But actually, we all have to sell, whether it's selling ourselves or a lawyer selling their services to new clients, or we're all or in HR when we were selling the organisation to potential hires. And so I almost wish there wasn't sales didn't have such a bad rep. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and so you make a good point, because sales, certainly in my industry, is becoming more and more technical, because our buyers are becoming more and more technical, or they're asking us to do more complex things. And maybe in years past, sales was much more I'll buy you a drink and, we can make, be pals and you'll buy something from me, won't you, kind of thing. But those days are gone. It just doesn't happen like that anymore. Now it's a really you have to demonstrate in a sales role. You understand the client's needs. You're sort of connecting with all the different parts of the organization who are decision makers or can influence a decision, and you're making sure you're getting the right technical inputs to sort of solve the client's problems. And that in itself is a technical exercise, right? Knowing what the right technical inputs are, being able to sort of look at what the proposal has been put together and say whether it works for your client or not. Sales is a technical role in our world.
Yeah.
And increasingly so.
Yeah. All right. So when you look back on your career journey so far, what would you call out as the high?
The highs, I mean, it's just being part of a growing business and winning new business opportunities, having those successes. That's fun, right? Those are the highs. If you win the big pitch, it's like, whoa, everybody gets the champagne out, and that's a real sort of high. And then, when you feel that the business is succeeding, that you are sort of getting the things right and sort of adding value for your clients, I think that's what makes you feel purposeful ultimately in your job. And I think we all have to have purpose, right? And if you're just going in and purposely, listly completing a set of tasks, then that's not going to be fun or exciting. But when you feel that you're actually delivering to some purpose and succeeding in doing so, then that's the ongoing high, if I can put it like that. I characterize it that way. I think all jobs have their natural ups and downs and good days and bad days, but I would pick those out as addressing the question of what are the highs.
Yeah. All right. And again, looking back at the career journey so far, what would you call out as the biggest challenge or perhaps a failure or limiting belief you had to overcome?
Yeah. So the flip sides of the highs, when you lose a client, when you lose a big pitch, when you have a period of really challenging performance and clients are beating you up, that's hard. That's really hard. But you've got to be able to roll with it, right? Because that's just part of the job. And you just have to pick yourself up after those disappointments, reflect on them, learn from them, and move on. And, that can be hard. I think, I've described a lot of change. Change isn't always easy. Sometimes it's much easier to stay in your comfort zone. And first of all, recognizing that it's time to change and that you need to change and you need to make a change and, live through that experience. That can be hard. But I think that's no matter what your career or what you're doing, that's just going to be reality. It's nothing stays the same. I think if you look at any profession or walk of life, they will have had that kind of experience in their own way. So that's just part of being a professional and being part of the modern world, is just accepting that change. And I suppose I remember particularly thinking this when I was deciding to make the move or to go out and take a look at what opportunities there might be when I was at the end of that 14-year stint. And you get to this point, you think, I've been here for so long and they like me here well enough, kind of thing. It's been all right. But nobody else would have me. I had that absolute belief about myself. It's like, what have I been doing for the last 14 years? What am I going to put on my CV? And these are sort of, who'd be interested in this stuff. So you have to get past that. You have to sort of simply, no, I do have valuable skills and I need to be able to talk about them and I can evidence them. I think that's always been my self-limiting belief, is that I will always see deficiency in myself, or something goes wrong and I'll always think it was my fault, something that I had failed to do or be or whatever. And it's not always the case. I mean, you have to recognize your weaknesses, right? But you'll believe in yourself to make it through those kinds of changes and have the courage to make the changes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, if you don't pluck up that courage, you won't make the change, and then you will stay where you are, and you potentially could get stale and then become unhappy. I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think sometimes when we do something that we're an expert in, or if something comes very naturally to us, we don't necessarily see it as a skill. And I think sometimes we're so great at spotting skills and expertise and value in others, but sometimes it's hard to recognize it in ourselves. And I think that's a really important lesson for everybody to, just think about. Like you say, this is the experience. I can evidence that I'm good at this. Like, yeah, be confident.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's a fun little anecdote, but I always relate it. When I started at university, I mean, I sort of grew up in rural Ireland. I was in a very rural part of the country, and then went to university, the big smoke in Dublin, and to a class of mostly men. It was very male dominated. And honestly, they used to use so much jargon, and they seem to have read so much stuff, and all this, like, I'd just be bamboozled by them, kind of thinking, oh my God, I'm in trouble here. I'm not going to be able to keep up. But at the time at university, we were on a continuous assessment for the first year while we were there. So we had exams every 2 weeks, and they used to post the results publicly. That was just the way it was done. And after a few of these, I realised, oh no, I'm not having trouble keeping up here, actually. I'm doing just fine. Actually, I'm probably coming close to the top. And what that taught me was not to be intimidated by language and jargon and, sort of, biggery-uppery, if you like.
Yeah.
And that was a really valuable lesson, because in our industry, probably in most industries, there's so much jargon. And there's so many sort of slightly slangy ways of talking about things. And it can be really impenetrable. Like, even for someone, like, as I say, I'm touching lots of different parts of the industry. I'm talking to lots of different experts all the time. And even now, I have to say to people, I'm sorry, you're going to have to explain that to me. What is that particular TLA? And you have to not be afraid to ask that, right? And not be intimidated by it. Because most of the time, people actually don't realise they're using jargon. They're just using it because that's what they talk every day, and it's useful in your day-to-day jobs, and they're usually very happy to explain stuff to you. But if you're not willing to ask, then you can end up feeling pretty at sea pretty quickly. That can contribute to all kinds of lack of self-belief or other challenges and going forward. So I was lucky I learned that lesson early.
Yeah, that's a good lesson. We'll definitely make sure we talk about that in the show notes. I think often as well, you find if you're in a group of people and someone asks a question, there'll be other people in that room who breathe a sigh of relief that someone dared ask the question, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No such thing as a stupid question.
Exactly. Sorca, you mentioned being one of the only females doing maths at the university, and I'm just curious, while we're on this point, how has that been for you as a female in financial services? Because there are less of the females than men in the industry, and I know that great progress has been made over the last few years, but I'm wondering how that was for you.
You feel it sometimes. I think women often feel the imposter syndrome more than men, and maybe what I've described around sort of that lack of self-belief and the jargon thing, maybe that's been my version of that. You sort of feel always you're going to get caught out somehow because all the people around you are just cleverer or more confident or something, and so you do feel that. I think my colleagues have always treated me with the greatest of respect and support. I've never sort of felt any lack of that from my direct colleagues around me. Sometimes clients could be a little bit tricky, right? A little bit patronising. And I remember one particular meeting I went to, and I'd just been appointed as the consultant to a new client, and went in, and we were having the meeting, board table, and there were only two women in the room, myself and then the lady who was there taking notes.
Yeah.
And anyway, another sort of asset manager came in to present, what they'd been doing for this fund, and he had an armful of presentations, and he walked around the room and he handed individually a presentation to everyone in the room except for me and this other lady. Wow. I mean, it was just the most overt piece of sexism I've ever came across in my career. Thankfully, those moments were rare, but they did happen, and then you have to get a little bit bolshy, right? Just sort of, excuse me, I think you find that I need one of those as well. and they didn't happen very often, but they can around the margins. I think it has improved a great deal, but it's still out there, and you've got to call it out all the time. And I think it's responsibility for, me and other women who sort of got to this stage of our careers to make sure that there isn't somebody being talked over somewhere, or to make sure that there isn't somebody who's given a contribution to the meeting that suddenly just gets ignored and then repeated by somebody else later who takes credit for it. That kind of stuff goes on.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that your women are getting recognised and given their space and given their voice. And so I certainly feel a responsibility to make sure that the younger women on my team get that. And they do.
Yeah.
Because they're hungry and they're bright and they're good. So I'm not worried about them.
Good.
But I think that's all of our responsibility. Watch out for those things. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Sorca, I'm wondering about the role of mentors and sponsors and role models and how they've impacted your career.
Yeah, I've had lots along the way. I mentioned sort of that place where I had where I learnt my craft, if I can call it like that. There were the two gentlemen leading that practice, Mike and Guy. I just learnt so much from them. Obviously, the technical stuff I learned from them, but also they were both really great at giving me opportunities to present the work that I had done, at taking time to sort of teach me, at giving me sort of more responsibility and ownership, and sort of saying, well, you tell us what you think, Sorca, rather than just sort of tasking me with, stuff to do. So they really elevated me and pushed me along. Then I think when I was at, the 14-year stint, that, as you mentioned, that was where I was beginning to evolve towards more leadership roles. And I certainly had a couple of really valuable, I'm never quite sure whether they're coaches or mentors or just good friends, but people who are really willing to sort of listen to me and give me advice, but not in a didactic way, but quite often they would sort of, have you thought about this, or what's your view on this, or, what do you think? They would help me work through a problem, right? It's just by listening and asking me questions and so on. And be sympathetic when I was struggling with something, and never sort of doubt me. So I was lucky to have those. And I don't suppose I explicitly sought them out. As sometimes I worry a little bit when I see this thing about, I need to find myself a mentor and, good to appoint a mentor kind of thing. Maybe that works sometimes. Maybe that works that, through that more sort of formal appointment or matching, sort of dating game kind of thing. You come out the other side with somebody who turns out to be a true mentor. But I think a lot of it happens organically. Doesn't happen by accident either. I think you do have to sort of build those relationships. So it's not like this magically somebody becomes a mentor. You just have to start really working on those relationships and finding the people who you can talk to and are receptive to you and are willing to sort of give that back. And I think a lot of that does happen quite organically. Can be your line manager. Some of those people were my line managers. Sometimes they were just peers working in a different part of the organisation who you got to know either through occasional work contact or in a more social work context. And you know them when you find them. When you find them. As you get through, your the later parts of your career, it's more peers and sort of friends that you've made along the way, and they're very valuable. You have to nurture and seek them out and take care of those relationships for sure.
Great advice, thank you. All right. So for somebody who's thinking, wow, this path sounds great, I might like to explore how I could follow this path. What education or qualifications would you say are essential or desirable?
Yeah. So I think if you wanted to get into the asset management industry, I'm asset management for pension funds, so probably I'm more asset management at this point. Numeracy is really important. I think you have to have a degree of numeracy. That doesn't mean you don't have to have a maths degree or an engineering degree, but a willingness to sort of engage with sort of the maths of it and be able to think about, not be scared of the technical stuff. People will have more or less technical roles, but some engagement with that sort of numeracy part, I think, is important. There are various routes to qualification. The actuarial profession is just how I grew up to it. You don't have to be an actuary to do what I do. Other people do the CFA, Chartered Financial Analysis. I think there's also now specifically for alternatives investing, there are qualifications. So there are lots of different sort of routes or different types of qualifications within the industry. But I think entry level increasingly is some sort of numeracy in your first degree. And coding's part of that. Everybody should be able to code nowadays. Python, I think, is the code du jour. And I think it's an essential skill for living in the modern world, I'm afraid. So those are the formal educational pieces, but there are lots of different. It's a very broad church. There are lots of different routes to asset management.
Yeah, thank you. And if you were thinking about hiring for your department, what would you call out as the soft skills that you'd be looking for?
I'd like people to be able to communicate clearly, to talk in complete sentences, to look you in the eye, and it sounds simple, but it doesn't always happen, right? But have a degree of sort of confidence and be able to say sensible things. I don't expect people to have an enormous knowledge of the industry, because if somebody's coming new to it, then how can they? That's not a reasonable expectation. But I want to see curiosity. I want to see them interested in it and sort of taken some effort to find something out. And they may have completely misread, whatever publication was on your website, but they read it and they asked questions about it, and maybe sort of were able to play back some of it to you. And some of that curiosity, you want to be able to see, because I think you need to be curious. Because it's always evolving, it's always changing. I think I wanted to see a work ethic. You do this, you have to work hard. And I think you can see that in terms of how people have spent their time, and that doesn't, to me, always have to be sitting at a desk at a computer sort of crunching out numbers, but I want to see that somebody is busy, right? They're doing stuff, and they're have interesting hobbies that they're pursuing and sort of taking seriously, and that they're just an engaged person who sort of gets up and goes. That's what I want to see. Yeah.
Thank you. What does the future hold for your profession?
Well, it's more change. I mentioned that a lot of the types of pension funds that I talk about are getting very mature, and they're not taking new members, so they're going to roll off over the next few decades. There's still a lot of work to do for a while, and it's a new type of pension fund that's coming in. And without wanting to get into the details of it, that's much more about sort of the individual member, and it's sort of saying, here's money that we're investing on your behalf, but if you want us to do it a bit differently, let us know. We'll give you sort of the choice and the flexibility to do that. But we know that these are the kinds of things that people typically worry about. So you have to sort of build things that you think are right for individual investors, but empower them to have choices and give the flexibility that enables that. That means we're going to see, because this is millions of people, so you need to be able to give that flexibility and choice to millions of people, literally. That means we're going to see a lot of fintech. That's financial technology, and so it's using AI, so it's using computer and data and clever algorithms to help or to give individuals the tool to work through those choices and to convey them back to asset managers who can sort of aggregate all of that and make sure that we're delivering the right things. So fintech is a big theme in our industry, and of course AI is the thing of the moment, generative AI, and that's going to change the world again. That's one. The other is that we know climate change and decarbonisation of our economies, that is going to transform our capital markets. And again, sort of staying ahead of that and what that means for how we invest and how we measure portfolios as another huge mega trend, and we think that's really going to change capital markets very meaningfully over the next 10, 20 years and beyond. And how we sort of think about that and incorporate it into our investing is a really critical change. And more broadly, that one's probably the lead subject, but more broadly sustainability, to a fairer world, diversity, I mentioned climate change, but the one that's coming right up behind that is our natural capital. So making sure that we've got biodiversity. We've been hearing about bee populations declining and what that means for pollination and everything. Again, like climate change, we'll have to start thinking about that in terms of where we put capital to support maintaining or improving biodiversity. That becomes an investment problem as well. We can't solve it by ourselves, but we're an important part of the solution. And I think those are the themes that are really going to drive what comes next, both because individual needs to make choices, but because individuals really care about that stuff as well, and it's going to change our world.
Yeah, thank you. If people might want to find out more, what books or podcasts or websites might you recommend they go take a look at?
So a lot of asset managers have lots of published materials on their various websites around some of those mega themes in particular. So I think you can go to, if you think of any of the big asset managers, the big brand names that you're aware of, go and take a look at some of their websites and see what they're talking about at the moment and what's front of their minds. And you'll hear some of those themes that I've just mentioned, I think, loud and clear. If you're interested in the pensions industry, you can go to the PLSA, that's the Pension and Lifetime Savings Association. So that's our trade body. And so they've got lots of great publications about what's happening in pensions. They do a lot of publication of guidance for their members. So you may find interesting stuff on there, and survey data about the pensions industry. And then the other one is the pensions regulator, which also has lots of information about what's happening in the pensions world. Because there's so much change, they're having to issue a lot of guidance and a lot of education. They've got toolkits on there to educate yourself about it, which are free for use as well. So I would say any of those sources for sort of general pensions and asset management, if you're just curious to read some thought pieces or what's going on. If you're interested in professional qualifications, look at the Institute of Actuaries or look at the CFA Chartered Financial Analyst website as well about the specific qualifications.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. So, Sorca, what do you know now that you wish you'd known when you were just starting out on your career journey?
I think we all would have liked a crystal ball to know what were the things that were really going to take off, the trends. Work. You could have climbed on early, right? Be retired by now already, but I didn't have that. But joking aside, I think I probably would have liked to know that it's going to be okay, right? There's a lot of fear and anxiety. You don't know that it's overwhelming. And I think over time you learn, the world's going to keep turning. And, by this stage, I've lived through the tech wreck, the bursting of the tech bubble in the early noughties. I've lived through the financial crisis. I've lived now through COVID. We're now living through the cost of living crisis. And all of those were hard and scary at the time. Yeah. But the world kept turning and we're all okay. And, some of my peers left the industry and they've done other things and, their lives didn't end. And so I think just knowing, it'll be okay. And, things will change and it won't always be easy, but in the end, you'll be fine. That would have been nice to know. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And do you have any favourite quotes or mantras or things like that you find helpful?
So I mentioned it earlier, but the mantra, how are you going to eat the elephant? One bite at a time. That always springs to mind when I'm starting on a new task. And the other one, which I think is in a similar vein, I don't know why this one comes into my head. It's so non-inspirational. I don't even know why I say it. But I remember watching this documentary and there's a thing called the Komodo lizard or the monitor lizard. Okay. And apparently it's got really, really poisonous jaws. And what it does is it manages to bite its prey. It doesn't kill it straight away, but the prey will keep running away and it just slogs along behind it and waits for it to die. And then eventually it gets its prey. And sometimes when I'm finding stuff really hard to do or to keep working at, I just go, make like a monitor. Just keep going. And you get there. It's really not a very pleasant image, I know, but somehow it keeps me going when I'm finding things hard.
I love it. Thank you.
And that's if I'm jogging, doing some work or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it does make sense.
Just
Keep going. You'll get there.
Yeah.
Sorca, what is your secret to happiness and fulfillment at work?
At work, yeah, just make sure you're enjoying it. Yeah. And deal with the drudgery. We've all got a bit of that kind of thing. Don't make no drudgery a criterion, because it's not realistic. But on balance, you've got to be having fun and enjoying it. You have to be in a culture that you enjoy. I think values are so important. I mean, there are lots of different great cultures. There's no one singular great culture, but you've got to be in a culture where the values align with your values. If it doesn't, then you're going to be miserable. If you're in a place where you just don't feel you're aligned, that's not a happy place to be. So being in a place where you're in the right culture for you. And for me, that's about being able to trust my colleagues, that there's mutual respect and integrity. And also I know that they'll get the job done, and I can trust them and they can trust me. Yeah. They're not looking over my shoulder and I'm not looking over theirs. Yeah. And also laughter. You've got to have fun with your colleagues. There has to be a degree of laughter and levity in the day. We work hard. We got to be able to laugh about it and have some of that downtime as well. So that's important in the workplace. But it's also, the work-life balance thing is really important. You've got to have your life outside of work. You've got to have things that release your mind from what you're thinking about at work. For me, that's a lot of music. The Classical Fix podcast is sort of an example of that. And, other things that keep you busy and keep you occupied outside of work. And harder in the modern world is setting what the boundary is between those two things. Sort of making sure that this is where my work ends and my life begins. There has to be a little bit of movement in that from time to time, but for the most part, you need to figure out where that boundary is, and you have to police it. Nobody else is going to police it for you. So it's up to you to maintain that dividing line and make sure it's observed over time. That's the way I think about it. And it's the advice I always give to younger colleagues, and particularly younger mums who are maybe really beginning to battle with that in the workplace.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing. All great tips. Any final words of wisdom or encouragement before we wrap up?
Just be curious. Be willing to take risks.
Yeah.
Be courageous and enjoy it. Don't wait to be asked to do stuff. Take it and enjoy it. I think that would be my advice to anyone.
Wonderful. Sorca, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I've really loved the conversation. So thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much. I don't know when I get to indulge talking about myself for so long. So thank you. It's been great.
Thank you so much for joining Sorca and I today. We really hope you enjoyed the show. If you gained any value out of today's episode, please share it with your friends and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have any questions, comments or suggestions, do get in touch with us. Until next time, if you're feeling like you're at a career or educational crossroads, it could just be the right time to pivot. And I really like the advice from John D. Rockefeller when he said, "Don't be afraid to give up the good to go for the great." Have a great week, whatever you're doing, and we will see you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in.